Okay, thanks very much. I'm pleased to be here, and I look forward to a vigorous exchange among the candidates and between the candidates and the audience. Here's the game plan for this evening. We'll devote about 45 minutes to a debate among these candidates for Alderman-at-Large from Ward 5. The middle section will be about 15-20 minutes. A conversation between Alderman Ted Hess-Mahan and me. Mayor Seti Warren had a scheduling conflict and could not participate. After Alderman Hess-Mahan, we'll have roughly 45 minutes to hear the two candidates for school committee at large from Ward 2. We'll try to get you out as close to 9 o'clock as possible, and frankly, I'm committed to 9 o'clock. We want everyone to be engaged, and we want to learn much more about these candidates. So each of these three sections of the program will include questions from the audience. The candidates are invited to make a short opening statement, 1 minute or less, and I'll interrupt you if you go over, and then we'll get to the questions. Left to right, shall we start with you, Chris?
Sure, thanks very much. Hi, I'm Chris Steele. I want to thank the area councils for putting together this event. I'm very, very gratified that we were able to do this with all three area councils. As people know, ours is the only ward that has the entire geography covered by area councils. I'm very happy to have played a part in at least getting the Woburn side of that going and to get some of the interaction amongst them. I'm before you today because after acting as a volunteer here since I moved to the city 10 years ago, I recognized that our city is about to be going through a series of interesting issues and opportunities that are going to reflect around how we are going to educate our children, how we are going to do so in a financially stable way, how we're going to respond to the opportunities and risks that regional development places upon our city. And given my own background and experience as a land use planner, as someone that has worked on economic development and community development projects for over 20 years, and who's also advised corporate users on how they make decisions, including fiscal analysis and sustainability, I recognized that I had a set of skills that was going to be pertinent to the needs of the city going forward. Thank you.
I told you I was going to be very heavy-handed. Brian Yates is a two-term incumbent. He's been here for 27 years. Brian?
That's more than 2 terms.
Oh, excuse me. You're the 2 terms. 27, well, they were long terms.
Only seemed that way to the people watching the TV at home. Well, it's good to be home. That, as many of you know, I did graduate from the Emerson School and did participate in gym in this room. Well, they're not all pleasant memories, but I learned a lot here about how good it is to have all your facilities close at hand, to have not just the school where you and all your neighbors go, but also the branch library, which I did dearly love, both when it was in the basement down front and was in the all-purpose room over here. That's why when I saw Woburn and Auburndale faced with the loss of their libraries, I worked very hard to give them the books and the buildings that they needed to develop tremendous community centers. I'm pleased to have also played a role in preserving this building as the Emerson Community Center and Brigham House in the Highlands. Here in Upper Falls, I also learned the value of parks and playgrounds, and I've worked to preserve and enhance Hemlock Gorge. And I'll tell you more later.
And now, 2-term incumbent Deb Crossley.
Good evening. Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you to the Tri-Area Councils. I must say this is the most impressive venue that we have been in the 4th of our 4 debates. Many of you have heard this before, so I'm astonished that you want to come out and hear it again. But I have lived here in 28 years, raised our children here and through the public schools. I bring to the post of alderman decades of community experience, broadband, working and serving with the League of Women Voters for 20 years as their president, on many boards and commissions ranging from the Energy Commission to housing, to city planning, to social services. And that has taught me a lot about the city, about things that work, things that don't work so well, and I brought that with me. I'm also an architect. I work from home, small projects, very flexible, so I can let my city work take over my practice pretty easily.
That's a very good note on which to end.
Thank you.
This is the only formal part of the evening. I'm going to ask questions, and we'll sort of weave in and out. There's no set time limit, like buying a pound of art. We're going to just have a conversation. Let's start, however, at this end of the table. But this question is to all of you. If elected Alderman-at-Large from Ward 5, what is your absolute #1 priority for Newton? And what can you do to achieve it? And what would you trade off to accomplish it?
Oh, that's a lot of questions, actually, big question. I think the city is challenged to move forward on the capital plan that we have committed to by passing the override. I think it's doable, but I think it's going to require a lot of political discipline and a mixture of skills to make sure that the public decision-making process moves forward in a timely way, but in a thoughtful way, and that we make decisions that are wise, that spend those resources very carefully. And I think we need a mixture of talents on the board, but we also need people who have a sharp focus or keeping a sharp eye on staffing and on those resources and how they're being allocated.
So what can you do to achieve it? And what would you trade off to get there?
I don't know that there's trade-offs, unless you're talking about trading off my profession so that I can work more hours at this job. I think that I bring my background as an architect and working in city planning and on environmental issues. I have a good understanding of capital work is all about solving three-dimensional puzzles. It's all about the physical fabric of the city. And it's important to me, and my passion about it is because it's the people's house, and we need to take good care of it. We have not been taking good care of it. Until recent years, we haven't had a capital plan that is based on a real asset analysis. So now it makes sense, and we can move it forward. But we will still be challenged to do it well and to do this enormous amount of work in this fairly short period of time.
Brian, what would your absolute #1 priority be?
I think the absolute #1 priority relates to zoning. First of all, I would make every effort to ensure that the city does not give illegal building permits in contradiction to the policy enacted by ordinance in the city. This has happened several times in the past few years, and I have expressed my frustration on it to the law department and the inspectional services department, and it basically comes down to if you don't understand what the law is, ask the people who make the law. Instead of forcing people, some of them in this room, to appeal to the Zoning Board of Appeals, to the Mass Land Court, to the Mass Appeals Court. I think I have done that. I have supported those efforts. Beyond that, I think we need zoning reform, which Deb has honchoed, to continue. It's very complex. Our consultant has come in and said, just simplifying it is so hard because there are inherent contradictions in our text that he's going to need more guidance from us. And that's before you get into the real complexities. But I think there have been time bombs left there from trying to be nice and grandfathering people in 1940 and 1953 when their previous zoning changes. I think we need to get around that if it takes map changes as well as text changes. I think we have to do it. As to what to give up, probably our sanity, but beyond that, it's just time and effort and looking at things hard and explaining them to each other and coming to a conclusion.
Well, Newton has a lot of psychiatrists and psychotherapists.
That's true.
So, we'll be okay in that.
I mean, the fact that a psychiatric nurse and a psychologist are two state reps is fascinating.
Chris,
Sure.
what would your absolute #1 priority be, and what
Well,
would you do to get it?
If I can just kind of introduce this thought, I think that the concept of going with any one absolute priority fails to notice that everything that we do as a city is interconnected. Any sort of a pressure on one place is going to have some sort of an impact someplace else. To the extent that I can actually put a priority out there, I think that we need to continue the work that's been done to get our financial house in order. I think that we need to do a lot more work with regards to making ourselves more financially self-sustaining, and that we need to find ways of doing so without continually having to come back to the residential tax base with override after override. I think that there's work in terms of specifics. There's work that we should be doing with taking a look at the OPEB unfunded liabilities that we have sitting out there. That includes working with our state reps to get an appropriate framework for renegotiating these over time. Once we get that in place, reserving against it appropriately, finding ways to go out to the private sector to create some partnerships for funding some necessary infrastructure, which we've already started to do with some of the development projects that we've seen around the city. And that we should also be looking at other opportunities for some of the commercial properties that we have around the city that are undervalued and underutilized. If you actually take a look at the proportion of the tax base, the property tax base in this city that is now shouldered by the residential homeowners, it is an astounding proportion if you compare us to other cities of similar size. And yet we have commercial properties that are underutilized. The more I think that we can use those in an appropriate fashion, that we take a look and understand the traffic and other impacts that we're placing upon the city at the same time, the more I think that we can use this underutilized asset to help and be a partner in terms of trying to address some of the financial issues.
I hear in the language, we need to do this, we need to do that. The question really is, you personally, what are you personally going to do?
I'm answering the question a little bit because my own experience in nature is that you can't do anything alone unless you can actually bring people along with you. So to the extent that I have the experience in terms of fiscal analysis, in terms of understanding fiscal trade-offs, in terms of scenario planning, taking a look at a set of options and seeing how they're going to play out over time, certainly I'm very willing to take a leadership role in making that happen, but you have to bring others along with you.
Okay, I have a number of questions that all come under the umbrella of how would your knowledge of Ward 5 issues and priorities affect your decision on citywide issues? I guess it's another way of asking, who are your constituents and how will you prioritize them in the decision-making process? Let's see, we started with Deb. Brian, how about?
Well, I think one good example is the work that Deb and Alderman Fuller have done on creating the infrastructure plan. That it relates to the first stage of fixing our sewers is going to be paid for by the developer of the Riverside complex. And they will pay to remove 8 times the amount of sewage that they put into the system. And that was one of the significant benefits that I saw in that project, and one of the reasons why I voted for it, because in my view, that was trying to prevent a recurrence of the devastation that a lot of the people in Ward 5 faced back in 2010, when literally their sewers were backing up into their basements. So I think if you can find some way to do the type of partnerships that Chris was referring to, that perhaps the resources come in one area and are put into another one that is nonetheless within a logical nexus. That the sewage line that goes down Quinnipiquin Road ultimately goes past the Riverside site, so it's legitimate to use resources that those developers contribute to reduce the amount of fluid that's in that system.
Chris, your take on that?
Sure. I want to echo that a little bit. I can tell you that from the 2010 situation, and even before then, we previously lived at a house on Carlton Road, which was just really up from the river. And after we moved in, helpfully, one of our neighbors said, by the way, you should probably have the DPW come in and clean out the sewer line. I'd say, again, helpfully, after we had moved in, because it will back up into your house on a regular basis. To answer your question directly, I think that an at-large alderman is definitely there to handle citywide issues, but they do so within the context of actually seeing the issues around them on a day-to-day basis, of seeing their neighbors and having the conversations that they have on the street. within Ward 5, we are living with the stormwater issues, we're living with the sewer issues, we're living with the traffic, we're looking at what might happen at the Route 9 and 128 with regards to the Adeline project and the change on the interchange there. We have a very, very visceral and direct interaction with some of the things that are going to be key issues coming forward.
Okay, Deb, as I go to you, looking at, just picking up from where Chris was, but in the context of that overall local versus citywide orientation, you were quoted in the paper as saying that we need to take a regional view of projects like the Adeline project. What exactly does that mean, and how would that play out in the case of traffic impacts on Quinnipiquin Road and Chestnut Street?
I'd rather answer your first question.
Okay, but then then we'll come back to the other.
And I have to say, I love when people talk about sewage because, and I think where Brian was going with that is, we are Alderman-at-Large. So our constituents, in direct answer to your question, are everyone in the city. And I get calls from everyone in the city. I get calls from the other side of the city, depending on the issue. Some issues are much more local, and I get calls from people in Ward 5 to help them out with various specific things, with a neighbor encroaching on their property or a water line that's broken or whatever. And you help with those things as best you can, or at least you guide people to where it is they can find the help. And we do that all the time. But the big picture issues are really where I think my strengths are and how I see the job. There's an awful lot of work to do in the city of Newton to better take care of our city, to better take care of our infrastructure, and we have to stop looking at it in a crisis management kind of way. That is why I got involved with Alderman Fuller actually and put together a strategic plan for repairing our underground infrastructure, and it has direct impacts on a number of areas of the city, but it will also have a direct impact on the Quinnipiquin Road situation eventually, especially once we get to the stormwater system. Do you want me to keep going on Adel? That's really a very different question, but it's...
Well, if you can address that, Adeline, and your
15
comment
seconds.
about regional effects, if it's good for the larger Metro West region, but it's really bad for the people in Ward 5?
Oh, no, that's not the point at all. The point is that we can't look, we're not in a bubble, is that we are impacted by all of the things that go on around us. We know that all too well because we are a throughway for traffic, going from the western part of the state into Boston and to Cambridge. We have to deal with that. We've been dealing with it for many, many decades. We've got the Mass Pike, we've got Route 9, even Commonwealth Avenue is somewhat of a throughway, and we have the Beltway. So we are impacted by all of those kinds of decisions, and when the state is doing work, we're watching it to take a look at just how it is going to impact it. What if anything, but can we do about it? We can't do anything if we're not aware of it. So being aware of those regional infrastructure issues is very important.
Do either one of you want to comment on that? Because we have about 5 hours worth of questions.
Oh, well, I can stay. There's nothing else going on.
I'd like to move on to the question
Well,
of...
actually, I would like to
Oh,
pick up
okay,
on that.
sure.
That I think there's a very clear problem of silos, particularly at the state level, that Mass DOT, they were told widen 128, make 128 go faster. And none of 128 was physically, at least within that target area, within the city. So they held meetings in Needham and Wellesley, and as well as the other communities further to the south. But some of us had to crash those meetings. I filed the first item with the Public Safety and Transportation Committee to ask our traffic people to look at those figures and tell us what's going on. And it was one of those meetings when we were first informed, oh, by the way, they're knocking out 2 of the clover leaves, which I think everyone was stunned to hear. And that led to ongoing pressure on there until finally we got Mass DOT, DC, Department of Transportation, Department of Conservation and Recreation, I could lapse into jargon very easily, to come out and at least explain their theory. They seem to have almost religious fervor that their plan will work. having seen the simulation, I'm not convinced. I think there are serious issues there. We did get them to take baseline data on the intersections that would be impacted by that. But another example is when Governor Weld took down the toll booth out from the Mass Pike, he actually generated a great deal of traffic on our local streets from people who wanted to go those two spots without having to pay the taxes, pay the tolls. So obviously, regional things have major impacts on us, but we have comparatively little control. But at least we can be aware, and we can inform our state officials of our concerns.
Chris, do you want to add to that, or should we move on to
If I could just
affordable housing?
give
Sure.
you 30 seconds on that, I think that everything that's just been said is absolutely correct, and I think that we should be paying attention to the regional pressures that are happening with regards to growth. All of that is going to have impacts upon this city, and particularly with regards to Ward 5's position dead up against 128, we need to pay attention to actually understand the pressures that we're going to be feeling.
May I add just one thing
Absolutely.
to this? So,
Quickly.
you know, we don't have a lot of control, but we were able to do something this time by working with our own city transportation department and Alderman in Ward 8 as well. We were able to talk to the state and convince them, and they are doing, if they haven't done most of them already, traffic counts at all of the roads and intersections and so forth that we thought might be impacted by this. So they're doing traffic counts now. Once everything is constructed and in place, they'll do traffic counts later, and there's an agreement to employ some mitigation strategies if they find that there are in fact impacts. So that's something that, you know, if you didn't do that, you wouldn't have any data and you wouldn't be able to do anything at the other end either.
Yeah. Newton is a mature city with little buildable land. Where do the opportunities lie for building affordable housing? Let's try to keep our answers short because, as I said, we could go on forever.
Do you want to start down
Sure.
here at this point? Okay. Yeah, I think that the answer with regards to affordable housing actually is the same answer that you would have for any sort of building opportunity around the city. We have properties that lie around the city that are functionally obsolete. I'm not talking about homes. I think that there's quite a bit with regards to historic preservation and preservation of the actual fabric of what makes Newton Newton that we need to do work on, per Brian's comment before on the zoning side of things. However, there are some older commercial properties in particular that I think are no longer functional for today's needs. And I think those are some properties that we should be taking a look at for opportunities, certainly possibly for housing, but certainly for commercial uses as well.
Brian?
Well, I think some examples of those that are now functionally obsolescent are pieces of the factory complex down at the intersection of Oak and Needham Streets. The facade there includes Clark Industries and Madame Paulette's studio. And the owners of that property want to enhance the value there. They're actually hoping to get Clark Industries to come to town and double the number of employees they have. Obviously, there are many traffic issues there, but they went to the Historic Commission to seek to be allowed to demolish these, even though some of them were historic. I think the Historic Commission balanced the needs very nicely, and they allowed the biggest and ugliest to be demolished, but those that were more subject to some type of revitalization and reuse, they put a demolition delay on. That I think I worked up in Lowell, and clearly there's tremendous amount of potential for housing revitalization in older industrial properties, but it's a very complex thing and needs to be put together very carefully.
I actually think there's a tremendous amount of potential in Newton in terms of just simply identifying sites that could provide affordable housing. But there's different levels, let's say, of what does affordable housing mean? Affordable to whom? We're talking about very low income, poverty level folks. Are we talking about folks who qualify for subsidized housing according to state or federal guidelines for low to moderate income housing? Or are we talking about the gap housing, which is the fastest growing group, I think, of folks who need housing, who can't afford to move into Newton because they don't make 150 to 180% of median income. They don't qualify for subsidy, but there's not a lot here for them. So what do we do about that? We have two I think, levels at which we can address this. In one case we do. We have something called the Consolidated Housing Plan, which is written every 5 years, and there's an action plan written against it and reviewed by HUD every year. And those monies are our federal CDBG and home funds, where we're responsible to create a certain number of housing units, or use at least a certain percentage of those funds to create new affordable housing units according to the state and federal guidelines. So those are the low and moderate income and very low income housing. On the other hand, there's opportunities, and this goes back to zoning. When you look at looking at substantive reform in our zoning ordinances, it's about creating opportunities and encouraging certain types of development where you want it. If we allowed by right, for example, in our village centers, 3- or 4-story buildings, which is what many of them, like Newton Center, West Newton, Newtonville, used to be at the turn of the century, and we allowed the 4th story, say, only if you provided a certain number or a certain size of affordable housing units. We're bringing foot traffic into the village. We're creating a smaller unit as sort of naturally affordable versus a big house on a big plot of land. What about accessory apartments? We have a lot of very large homes in Newton. I'm seeing young people not so interested in buying big, large homes with all of the maintenance and so forth that's required. And I'm seeing older folks who can't afford to live here anymore and who would like to create a second unit in their homes. Our laws currently are extremely restrictive in that regard, so there's an opportunity for affordable housing. And we could actually go on from here, but I'm sure you're looking at me and you're wanting to move on.
No, before, I want to open it up to questions from the audience, but I promised made a promise to ask you, and this really is a very quick answer, and it's substantively, it's sort of a school committee question, but as alderman, you control the purse strings, and the question is, to what extent does Newton need another elementary school?
Am I first? You're looking
sure,
at me.
yeah, why not?
That was a really deep stare, so okay. So this is a question for the school department and the school committee, because the school committee determines the programmatic needs for the students.
Are you willing to pay for another school?
Me personally, so, no, me personally, no. So, I've always been a supporter of the schools, and I've supported both overrides that passed, and one that didn't, actually. And, but this is about long-term planning. I understand that in this community here, right here at the Emerson School, there are folks who are, who lost their neighborhood schools, their neighborhood school about 35 years ago, thereabouts. And so the kids here, there's a problem here. The kids here are bused to school. They have no other choice than to be bused to school. I understand that. They are bused to school, and we have busing fees. The busing fees, there are waivers and so forth, but to me, that is the biggest issue here, is that it's a district that is called a buffer zone, and I understand that the lines are going to change over the years as the capital plan for the schools evolves, and it's a long-range plan that's been set out according to certain enrollment projections. As you move through any strategic plan over time, things change. The enrollment projections could change. We don't know that now, so I can't say that we need a 16th school now. It's possible at some point in the future the city may need a 16th school. We're looking ahead in detail 5 years right now.
Brian, do you want to add to that?
Yes, actually, I was a member of historic Upper Falls Village United, which is kind of a cool name, which was trying to fight the closing back then. And the arguments that we made back then have all basically come true, that kids can't walk to school, whereas they all did before, and now they all have to take the bus. And as to the financial stability of these solutions, if you build a building, eventually you pay off the bonds and you've got the building. If you make it that the hundreds of kids have to be bused to schools, you never stop that. You may shift who's paying for it onto the parents or onto the taxpayers, but it goes on perpetually. And I think there was a lack of recognition of that. And we talk about long-range planning. Well, the director of long-range planning for the school committee back in those days said, well, gee, you never see a pregnant woman in the supermarket, so we can close some of our schools. Well, clearly that was short-sighted. We've got at least a school's worth, probably more, of modulars around the city. And there's been some very clever plans worked out here where you could, in fact, reduce classrooms, reduce the capacity, no, not reduce the capacity, increase the capacity enough to accommodate any reasonably likely increase. As Jeff Epstein said on one of the previous shows I was on, that about 6 years out, the school department was off by like 400 plus kids, which is not unreasonable because it's a very hard thing to predict.
I'd like to bring Chris
Sure.
in on this.
Yeah, as Deb had noted, we did go through two strategic plans, 2007 and I think 2011, that showed that there could be some scenarios where you needed to have an additional school on the south side. But the plan that was passed forward at the present time didn't call for it, and that's what the overrides were based on. I think the lesson that we learned from 20, 30 years ago, though, is you always keep your options open because data changes over time. I think that it's entirely possible that we may need another school down on the south side, and we need to continue to look at that data.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? In back?
Well, if you can hear me, that's fine. I want to express my
And basically a question, not a speech, because we're really pressed for time.
I'd like to address a question to Mr. Steele. I've heard remarkable consonants among the candidates as to their vision for the city. But I have not heard from Mr. Steele what defects in past performance or future vision as revealed in these debates should prompt me to change my representation in the Board of Aldermen.
Okay. I can tell you a little bit about what my experience is that's different from perhaps even some of the others that are on the Board of Aldermen more generally, in addition to what we've got in the ward right now. My own background in terms of working with the private sector, working with corporations as they make decisions and trying to work through the financial implications of trying to figure out where is the right place to get the people that I need, where's the right people to get the other partners that I need to be successful. It gives me an idea as to how to trade off what are some of the goals that we're trying to do with, as well as what do we have from the fiscal resources, and to the extent that we can be creative with those fiscal resources, what is the right way to go ahead and achieve that? I think, in short, I bring the fiscal modeling that we need to have a lot more of on the Board of Aldermen in these next couple of years.
Thank you. Any other questions either for all three or for a specific person? Yes?
I would like Brian Yates to explain why we need a school in Number Falls. We have been needing it for 35 years, and now we need it more than ever because our kids are being busted free in schools.
I'm sorry. You want Brian to explain why we need a school in Upper... I thought we already heard from him on that. Brian, take 15 seconds.
Yes, because at least initially, all the kids from Upper Falls went to Countryside. More recently, as Countryside got overcrowded and bumped kids who should go to Countryside up to Bowen, leading to overcrowding there, that kids from Upper Falls were now to be sent, unless they had older siblings, to Ainger. And some go, I believe, up to Zervis as well, and it just destroys neighborhood cohesion.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have one last question before we go to closing. Oh, there is. Good.
I have a question about zoning. And basically, we're having houses that are about 100 years old are being replaced with structures that are sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times big.
Could you pose it as a question, please?
And basically, those new structures do not respect the scale, the size, the design of the neighborhood. So my question is, what is your vision for Newton regarding the future of map mansions?
Okay, and we can't get into, we cannot get into specifics right now about that one situation.
We have somebody who's coming, trying to move in here with $1 million and $2 million houses in Newcastle Falls where we have small, and they want to take down an 1835 historic.
All right, Brian, you want to speak to that? And
Yeah, I think as the original sponsor of the demolition delay ordinance, I've been very sensitive to this, that I think there are clearly instances where historic houses have been demolished and replaced with something that is, has no social value or social utility, and frequently is the older, smaller homes were replaced by something that's only affordable to larger people with larger incomes. The trouble is we have to balance between the property rights of the people who are adversely affected by the monster homes and the property rights of the people who have acquired the lots. And I think you do need to do a combination of factors, and I think one thing that's worth looking at again now is expansion of the historic district, which has more authority than a demolition delay. There was an expansion considered. Actually, the hearing was right in this room, and it was met with resounding rejection. But I think some of the people who were angry about that possibility have been equally angry at some of the things that have been knocked down and replaced. So it's a combination of the historic preservation ordinances as well as the zoning. And there is some flexibility. I mean, we could take a look at the way Wellesley does it, but it's a very tough sell with a lot of members of the board.
Deb, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I wouldn't want to sugarcoat how difficult a problem this is. You know, I give an example. A lot of people ask this kind of a question. A lot of people are concerned about the little houses that are giving way to much bigger houses. Some of them are historic, some of them are not historic. Okay, let me finish. I know Marjorie wants to wrap this up. So, you know, we could go out into the community and we could look at 3,000 square foot houses. And one would be built in, say, an arts and crafts style with lots of deep overhangs and recessed entrances and bay windows, and it would be just lovely. And the next one would be the same size house, but it would be a builder special. It would be pretty much a box with a simple roof, absolutely the same size, could be on the same size lot, pushing the same limits. And you would wake up in the morning, and if you faced the box, you would be very unhappy. But if you faced the other one, the one that was sensitively designed, even though somebody might have taken down a small house to put up the 3,000 square foot house, you might be perfectly happy. And
I was talking about having a 5,000 or 6,000 square feet.
I'm just trying to give you an example.
Okay.
Replacing a 1,700 square feet.
Okay, Chris?
There are two answers to this. One is that we do have to do a lot more with regards to the historic preservation ordinance, and we've got to make that have some actual teeth to it. The other side of it is we've been talking a little bit with regards to zoning over the past couple of minutes here. The ordinance right now that we have is broken. It's been added on to and is self-contradictory, and we already got into that. There are tools that we can put forward now that, first of all, encourage the development of things to the extent that it's appropriate, that are naturally affordable. And there are other things that we can do to actually incorporate some form-based codes so that we set forth some design elements that are within the context of what we think are appropriate for development in New England, so that we're not surprised by the things that end up on these sites.
Thank you. We could go to closing statements now, and let's see, we started. All right, well, I can take one more question, but we really, I'm being signaled. I'm sorry, we have to go to closing statements.
Okay.
Why don't we start with Brian?
Okay. As I said, my roots are very deep here in Upper Falls. I learned the value of parks and greenways in the Charles River at Hemlock Gorge and at what's now the Braceland Playground. And I've been proud to have been a part of the team that is about to make the Upper Falls Greenway a reality. In the next term, I will work to connect it to the Charles River Pathway, to improve the pathway along Quinnipiquin Road, and to bring the aqueducts, including the Sudbury, which goes through Echo Bridge, into wider use as part of our system of trails. As chairman of the Upper Falls Advisory Committee and president of the Upper Falls CDC, I led the revitalization of Petty Square and fought against the bar rooms that used to characterize Lower Elliott Street and Chestnut Street. In my next term, I would like to work with the areas that need revitalization using the principles of the Main Streets program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Thank you very much. Chris?
Sure. I want to thank again the area councils for putting this together. I think it's a great way for us to be talking about some of the neighborhood issues and for you to get a chance to see where the three of us are coming on these. While I'm a relative newcomer to the city, I can tell you that my commitment to the city is great. I have, made a commitment to raising my family here. I intend to stay here until such time as I am no longer on this earth. Hopefully that won't be too soon. And I do intend to make sure that this place is a better place for as long as I have the chance to make a difference here. And for that, I ask for your vote.
Thank you. And you won my enduring love because you came in at 30 seconds, not.
I don't know if I can do that. So I'm Deb Crossley, and I, too, am asking for your vote on November 5th. I would like to continue working on a lot of the initiatives that I've been able to work on collaboratively with the aldermen, with many talented and dedicated citizens, and with the administration, as well as keeping a sharp eye on the capital plan. I brought the Green Communities program here. That pays off in terms of a series of grants. I'd like to keep my eye on that. I'd like to make sure that our water, sewer, stormwater strategic plan unfolds in a deliberative and sure way so that we complete those plans maybe in my lifetime. I would like to continue the zoning work that I started. I was asked to chair the zoning reform group that we've been talking about this evening. We are in the first phase of reform. We're almost able to see the ordinances, and then we will move into substantive reform. I'd like to do all of those things, and with your vote, I can continue that work.
Thank you very, very much to the three of you. Really appreciate your time and interest. The score is 0-0, and the Red Sox are ahead. Okay, Alderman Ted Hess-Mahan is from Ward 3. He's held the seat for 10 years. He is the challenger in this year's mayoral race. He's also the candidate for re-election to his aldermanic seat. He serves on the Board of Aldermen's Programs and Services Committee and its Rules Subcommittee, and is chair of the Land Use Committee. He's a litigator and he's a mediator, may we have your opening statement, please?
Absolutely. Well, again, I want to thank the tri-area councils. I think that's so neat. You have three from one ward. You have a surplus of riches. I also want to thank Carol Stapleton. She's one of the first people working for the city that I got to work with closely. I don't know if you remember when we first met. It was working on the first annual memorial for 9/11. And it was one of the most enriching experiences of my life. And I learned a lot from Carol, and I continue to do so. So I just want to give a shout out to her. I've got 30 years of experience in private and public sectors. I started out working with and advocating for people with disabilities. I've been an attorney for over 20 years. I started out at one of the largest law firms in New England, and now I'm in solo practice for myself. I have 10 years on the Board of Aldermen serving you, people of Newton. While I've been on the Board of Aldermen, I didn't wait around my first term. I did something which actually got some of the members of the school committee mad at me, which was to challenge the Ed Center to look at administrative efficiencies and cutting administrative costs in order to save teachers' jobs. When a few years later, I faced down opposition from national retail pharmacies and got a ban on tobacco sales at pharmacies, hospitals, and medical centers passed. And more recently, as a couple people alluded to, we've passed a number of initiatives, including special permits for the Chestnut Hill Square project and the Riverside Station project.
Could you wrap up your opening?
I am absolutely going to, which is going to bring a lot of much-needed economic development, revenue, and jobs to Newton.
Great. And may I urge, please, that we not have secondary conversations in the back. People who go to the polls will find that they can vote for you for mayor, and they can vote for you for Alderman-at-Large from Ward 3. Which do you prefer for them to do?
Mayor.
Will you leave your law practice if you're
I'll have to.
To be perfectly blunt, you were outvoted by the incumbent mayor by more than a 3-to-1 margin.
Well, I actually think the voters outvoted me, not the mayor, but
Well, okay, I put it
I'm
passive
just-
voice.
I'm having a little fun with it.
Is this a serious candidacy or a symbolic gesture?
Well, I'm very serious about it. I mean, this has taken up a lot of my time. It has taken me away from my legal practice in order to do this. I didn't take this decision lightly. It involves a deep commitment on my part to address some of the issues that I've seen in the city that we have, which is a complete lack of a strategic plan to meet the long-range fiscal needs of the city, which can be demonstrated, if no other way, by $600 million in unfunded liability for non-pension retiree benefits, also known as OPEB. I know that for a lot of people that is maybe kind of an arcane subject. They don't necessarily understand what that's about. But it's something that has been there for a long time, has been building up for a long time, and it's going to take 20, 30, 40 years to solve, not 5 years. And we really have to get started like yesterday on doing it.
Well, as I understand it, under the current administration, something like $23 million has been put into that. Now, I know that's a drop in the bucket.
Actually, it's about a little over $500,000.
Really?
Yes. Into an irrevocable trust that's supposed to meet $602 million in unfunded liability.
So what exactly would you do to address that issue?
Well, one of the first things we need to do, we've got a special state commission that was put together to study the OPEB issue and unfunded liability issue for OPEB, and that's other post-employment benefits, which is the non-pension retiree benefits I was talking about. And that's those health benefits primarily for active for retirees who are now active employees. The way to resolve this really is at both the state and the local level. We can't do it alone. If we wait around for the state or the federal government to bail us out, though, we may find ourselves going the way of Detroit, right, which is in bankruptcy court right now. This is a huge problem for cities and towns across the state, but a number of cities and towns have been able to address this effectively through, if nothing else, negotiating with their unions to get premium shares which are closer to 50-50 rather than the 25-75 split we have right now. That's
Could you
a huge
explain
change.
that whole idea of premium shares?
Sure. Well, right now, the premiums that are paid by employees are 25%.
Oh, you're talking about insurance.
For health coverage, yes. For the health plan, it's 25% for the premiums, and the city pays the remaining 75%. As you can imagine, that's a significant burden on the city. If you're working in the private sector, as I have for most of my adult life, except when I was working for the state, you don't find that plan very many places. And it is a liability for the city that we really need to address and that we can't afford not to. But on the state level, we need some help because one of the other things that was recommended by the special commission was to change the years of service and the age requirements for becoming eligible for this. As an alderman, after 10 years, I can get lifetime health plan coverage. Do you realize that? 10 years. I'm almost there. And to me, that seems perhaps a little bit unfair. So there is a prorating that would be involved, looking at the years of service so that folks who only have 10 years of service maybe don't get as generous a health plan coverage after they retire. And those who've worked many more years, 20, 30 years, for instance, would get a much more generous health plan benefit. But we have to start doing that.
So that whole area of the unfunded liability, is that your top priority?
It has to be. I mean, it's just a reality for the city. The only other way we solve that, and I think the tab misunderstood what I said. I was not advocating that we do it as a debt exclusion. I was saying the only other choice we have is to do it as a debt exclusion because about the time we run out of money and have to, start digging into the reserves in order to pay it off, Medicare is going to be running out of money as well, and we're going to be up a creek.
You have criticized, according to the tab, the turnover in City Hall as symptomatic of poor leadership. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, the Globe reported back in April about a revolving door in senior management at City Hall, and this is a problem where we've had senior managers, department heads, assistant department heads who come and go in a very short period of time. We have, for instance, in performance management, we had 2 directors over a period of time. We haven't had one since December. These were both people hired by this administration. When I was in the debate last night with the mayor, he was asked to explain this. He says, well, it's hard to find the right people. Well, apparently so. Keeps hiring people and then letting them go. We have another serious problem right now. As you all may have read in today's tab, there was yet another employee lawsuit against the city by a police officer, a female police officer, claiming gender discrimination. We have had no director of human resources since May. Now, you may say, well, human resources, maybe that's not all that important. On the contrary, not having a director of human resources means there's nobody in charge of resolving these kinds of disputes before they turn into major lawsuits. And this one could be a major one because, again, it's gender discrimination in hiring. And this is one you can't pin on Matt Cummings. This is on the current police chief and the mayor. Not taking action on it, and in the middle of, and if you read the lawsuit, you'll see that in the middle of all this goings-ons, the Director of Human Resources left, and the CFO of the city took over as the Director of Human Resources and was split between 2 different jobs. And in the non-endorsement endorsement in the tab today, spent a lot of time talking about the fact that they had talked to city employees, and definitely there's a problem. There's a lack of morale. People are coming and going. They're not happy with their jobs. We're going to have a brain drain in Newton where we're going to lose a lot of people we spend a lot of time and money on training.
Now, the mayor says that there's a 6% turnover rate, half from normal retirements, and that's average, consistent with other communities. Do you dispute that?
Well, he was talking about the vacancy rate. The turnover rate, I've heard several different figures from him in the last 2 weeks, none of which matched. Last night I heard 7%, and that was from somebody, from Trevor Jones at the tab. I don't know for sure, in homework you got to show your work. But what I do know is that over 1/3 of the workforce has left since January of 2010 when this mayor started, 1/3. And it doesn't necessarily matter why all of them left. Part of the big problem is it's the key positions that have been left vacant. Jobs like project managers, and again, this was reported in the tab editorial today. The project managers for various projects, we're about to embark on a whole bunch of renovations of schools and firehouses and what have you, streets and sidewalks, whatever, and you've got a lot of vacancies in these project manager positions. That's when mistakes happen, and mistakes have happened. Drive through Newton Center if you don't believe me.
Okay. Are you satisfied that big projects like Adelane, Riverside, and Chestnut Hill Square have adequately protected Ward 5 neighborhoods from traffic and other secondary impacts?
Every time that we do this, we rely a lot on experts, and I've chaired the Land Use Committee now for 4 years, and while I've been leading the Land Use Committee, we did pass both Chestnut Hill Square and the Riverside Station project. Both times, we were told, this is how we're going to mitigate the traffic. The state had a plan for Route 9 and at Chestnut Hill Square that had been proposed and in the works for years and years and years. The plan for Riverside was heavily influenced by the conceptual review that we did. We had a lot of members of the public come in and say this is what we want. Also a lot of community meetings, and a lot of visits by both the Ward 4 aldermen and other aldermen and myself to the Department of Transportation to talk about what we were going to do in order to address that. I had a lot more confidence in the experts, what they were telling us about traffic mitigation before what happened in Newton Center happened. I will tell you that every effort we could was directed towards mitigating the traffic impact. We were not able to get direct access to Route 95 for the Riverside Station project, for instance, but we were able to get access to what's called the Collector Depositor Road, which is going to ease at least some of the traffic. They're going to use other mitigation measures like roundabouts, widening of Grove Street, and using, to the extent possible, redirecting people to other T stations, particularly during Red Sox days. I know it's on everybody's mind, so I might as well just say go Red Sox. But that's a big deal in that neighborhood. It's on a game day, which is 80 times a year, 82 times a year or more. It's a huge impact on that neighborhood. So I can only tell you that we've done everything we could. We did put in a condition that if the actual traffic exceeds the projections by more than 10%, and this is on both projects, Chestnut Hill Square and on Riverside, that the developer is going to have to come back and mitigate that, and that means that they're going to have to pay more money in order to fix the problems.
To what extent do you get the feeling, however, or perhaps you don't, that planners are so blind to the problems that are obvious to people who live there? Do they just not care because state or federal dollars are available? And what would you as mayor do to ensure that people in the neighborhoods are heeded more than they are today?
When you're talking about, traffic planning, one thing I will say, we got a boatload of money from the state for traffic mitigation for the Chestnut Hill Square project. Initially, that did not include Newton Center, and there was a certain use it or lose it that was involved. And I've talked to the transportation director. He was hired after, this plan was started, so he isn't specifically to blame for this, but we got a lot of money, and the idea was to spend it. I think we have to do a lot better planning, and one of the things that I propose is to consolidate the departments that do planning, infrastructure, and public resources, things like DPW, engineering, the planning department, the inspectional services department, which gives out building permits, Parks and Rec, all the ones that affect, the things that are most important to us, and have them all under one strategic office so that everyone's rowing in the same direction. What I see in this city, and I've been doing this for 10 years, folks, and so I spent a lot of time at City Hall and a lot of time meeting with people, and the frustrations that I hear from city staff is a lack of communication. Why is that? Because you've got a bunch of silos. Somebody else was saying it before about the state level. Well, we certainly have it at the local level as well. You've got the planning department, doesn't necessarily talk to the engineering department, doesn't necessarily talk to DPW about when they do these plans. One of the easiest things in Newton Center that would have made a huge difference, which I got to give a lot of credit to the commissioner of DPW for falling on his sword on this, was to say, geez, if we had just done some outreach to the public and also done a trial first, we could have saved a lot of money. Now, that money was state money, but it was still your taxpayer money. You paid for that.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes.
Just at the threshold, let me say you did wonderfully at the debate last night.
Oh, thank you.
I really enjoyed listening to you. That's the only nice thing I'm going to say to you. I am a bit disturbed, actually, troubled by one of your comments. You said you got a whole boatload of money from the state, and there was a use it or lose it. You have to spend it. If you were to become mayor, would that be your attitude toward all the money comes in, that the money comes in, and by God, I'm going to spend it because I've got it? Or do you think you would show any self-control, perhaps saving some money for the taxpayer?
I would say the latter. I mean, I think one of the things you got to do, you got to plan up front and not treat this money like somebody else's. I mean, not treat somebody else's money like your own. It disturbed me just as much as it disturbed you when a lot of money came in that was spent on things that, frankly, we didn't approve when we approved the special permit for Chestnut Hill Square. What we approved with the special permit was to put a light at the intersection of Cypress and Center, and crosswalk lights, and repaint the lanes so that it was clearer who had the right of way. And that was what the experts were telling us then. Once we got this influx of money, however, all of a sudden the plans got a lot more grandiose. And to me, that's a red flag. That says, well, wait a minute, if this plan is what was recommended to us in the first place, what's so bad about it because it costs less money?
Mark?
Do you think that Newton is getting its money's worth from the T? I mean, obviously public transportation is a very important issue, especially as traffic becomes an important issue. Do you think the T is treating Newton fairly?
I think it was frustrating working with the T, let me put it that way. I was chairing land use throughout the process of the special permit with the Riverside Station project. We worked on that formally for 18 months. And I had been in meetings about it for 18 months prior to that. And in the 3 years that I was involved in a lot of these meetings, trips to the DOT, talking to the MBTA Council and so forth, it was frustrating at their lack of commitment to do even the simplest things. And I say that with the knowledge that, in speaking to Mark Boyle, who is their general counsel, would explain to me, well, we're dealing with a board of trustees, and I don't have control over everything that they do. Nevertheless, on an operational level, from day to day, it was extremely frustrating for me. It was far more frustrating, I must tell you, for the Ward 4 alderman, because that's where Riverside is located, because getting cooperation from them was difficult. That said, the T first started talking about leasing this property back in 1983. That was the first time they approached the city about it. They put this out to bid back in, almost 7 years ago now. There were no bidders. They did it again. There was one bidder. The fact that there was only one bidder on this project would tell you that there are probably some problems with developing this site, but the T needs the money. No, I don't think we got the best possible deal that we could have. Well, I think we got the best possible deal out of the T that we could have gotten. Should they have done more? Yeah, I think they should have done more.
Other questions? Sally?
Yes. Sitting on the ad hoc Wobbin Council, I've been exposed to a couple of state problems. If you become our mayor, how would you help us to communicate with the DOT, the DCR, and the T, where we would like to have handicap accessible stops in Newton? We only have one. We have none in Newton Highlands, where there are many disabled people. And we also would like to have one in Wobbin and further out in Auburndale. How would you help us to make that relationship work better? We've come against a stone wall.
Really?
Yes.
Yes, I know this, Sally. I've heard this before. I think you have to work with your legislative delegation, and you have to, again, when the mayor of Newton calls, regardless of who the mayor is, the governor's people and the Secretary of Transportation are a little more likely to pay attention, partly because we pay more than our fair share of income taxes to the state, but also because, we're right there on the doorstep, and you have to some extent pay attention. Getting them to do what we want is an entirely different question, though. As you know, a lot of this planning goes on for many, many years. If you talk about the sound barriers all on the Mass Pike, they've had a plan for doing sound barriers up and down the Pike for years and years and years and years and years, and you still only have a very small part of it paid for, and that's the key, is how to pay for it. Same thing with Needham Street. Somebody, Deb or Brian will tell me if I'm wrong about this. How long ago was it that we first had Needham Street designs at 25%? I thought it was more than that. And where are they now? They're still at 25%, yeah. There's no money to do it. I mean, we had an opportunity to do it if the Stop and Shop had been developed, that the Board of Aldermen turned that down for better or worse, so we didn't get the money to do it, but it's money.
We have a question back.
Hi, speaking of the Stop and Shop, we got the housing development there instead. The aldermen were talking about wanting to have more affordable housing. With affordable housing, with more housing comes more children. What do you feel about giving a 16th school on this side of town?
Well, I agree with Brian. And it took me a long time to come around to that, because I had frankly deferred to the school committee in the past in terms of their long-range planning. And I'll just give you one quick vignette about my kids went to local school, to the Horace Mann School. When we first started going, there was like 250 kids that were in that building. I was in the school council, I should have known this. It was 250 kids when my oldest started kindergarten there. By the time my youngest graduated, there was 375, and it's still growing. And there's several modulars out front. But it's still a neighborhood school, and my kids, walk to it every single day, and then I'd walk on to get onto public transit. I don't think there's any substitute for a walkable neighborhood school. And you talk about equity, and for all those, I'm not going to repeat everything Brian said, but he's absolutely right. And the question that Carol had about the equity of the situation and why kids have to get on the bus to go to 3 different schools. What I don't get is that we made a mistake a generation ago by closing a whole bunch of elementary schools and middle schools. And then we're going to make the same stupid mistake again by spending $40 million to renovate a school that is not in dire need, or replace a school that's not in dire need of repairs like the Angel School was. And we're still going to be adding modulars around the city to deal with the overcrowding. And that's still not going to solve the problem of having to put your kids on a bus to get to school. It took me a long time to come around to it, but I'm thankful to the members of the Upper Falls Area Council who finally beat some sense into me.
We have time for one more question. Maureen?
I know. Hi, Maureen.
Able to ask our Alderman-at-Large for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Two issues. One is, I had a little different narrative on the Alderman project and how the city responded or lack thereof. There is going to be disruption for many years in Newton, in the tail of, behind the construction project. I would like to hear if you're aware of plans within the city to do a job of recognizing that and communicating and help people deal with that disruption that will come, especially during the construction period. And now we'll have the overlap with Riverside as well going on at the same time. I experienced
Why don't we just pose that as the question?
It's-
How are you going to help out when it hits the fan?
It hits the fan?
Adeline hits the fan.
Yeah, and you can add on top of that everything that's going on in Route 9 too. I mean, actually one of my big concerns was that the Adeline project was going to happen at the same time as we were doing everything on Route 9 with Chestnut Hill Square. We sort of dodged a bullet there, although, if you have to drive up and down there, I understand there's still a lot of traffic on there. It's going to be a lot of traffic. We're going to have a lot of inconvenience. I wouldn't call it just inconvenience. It's going to be a downright disruption for a number of years to come. I think the most important thing is to be coordinating with the state, and that's something that, in my experience so far with every project that we've worked on, major project, has been troubling at best. We don't have control over the state on the state roads.
I understand that, but I really hope that the city officials get creative about coming up with ways to communicate with the residents.
Oh, communicating, yes, okay.
All right.
I mean, that's
Do you
the
have a
very
quick
least we
question?
can do, yeah.
Quick, small?
Some years ago, there was a Guantanamo detainee that some aldermen wanted to become a Newton citizen. What was your position, and why wasn't his terrorist past vetted, and why weren't the citizens informed, and what did you learn from that situation?
Okay, so as you know, I was one of the co-sponsors on that, and the reason I co-sponsored that, I know the 2 lawyers. They were 2 Newton lawyers, and I had talked to them. And this was a fellow who was he was wrongfully detained, and that was determined by the U.S. government that he should not have been detained at Guantanamo for 8 years. And what I said then, and I'll say now, is that all I could think of in hearing his story and hearing from the lawyers who had worked pro bono to get determination that he was wrongfully detained was, if that were my son, and I do have a son, and if he were wrongfully detained for 8 years, and if for any reason he couldn't return to his home country, which was the case with this fellow, that I would hope that somebody in that country that had wrongfully detained him would do something in order to give him a home.
Thank you. Would you like to make a closing statement? There are lots of things that we missed, but we'll have to save that for another day. But would you like to?
Yes. Well, once again, I want to thank the Tri-Area Councils. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. The best part about this conclusion is it's almost over. I've brought some campaign literature. It's over on the table over there. My website is hessmahanformayor.com, HESSMAHAN, numeral 4, mayor.com. If you have any questions, you can always contact me, and I try and get back to you as quickly as possible. The best way to contact me is email, because my voicemail box is absolutely full, and I'm happy to answer your questions. And thank you again for the opportunity. Please vote for me on November 5th.
Thank you very much. Appreciate meeting you. I'd like to call up the two candidates for school committee, please, and while they're coming up, I will just say that they are to be elected at large from Ward 2. Margaret Albright, a 22-year Newton resident, has for the last decade been a consultant to area nonprofits in education, social services, and public health, assisting clients to align their programs with best practices and to articulate clear objectives to secure project funding from government and private sector sources. Andrea Steenstrup, a 6-year Newton resident, has a background in finance and accounting. She's a CPA, and she has worked at Cigna Healthcare in healthcare finance and in public accounting. She has 4 children in the Newton Public Schools. So welcome. I thank you very much for being with us. And oh, okay. This is a breaking. Oh, it's bottom of the first, and it's 0-0. I'm not covering up any. Let's start with the school issue that is of interest in this area, and that is another elementary school. Let's start in alphabetical order, which is also left to right. And Margaret, could you please?
Thanks, Marjorie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Opening statements. I forgot.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, do you want to make an opening statement, or you do want to?
I'm happy to make an opening
All right,
statement.
why don't we do that?
Though I know everybody wants to get home and see that game, so let's keep it short. I'm Margaret Albright, and I'm running for school committee from Ward 2, but all Newton can vote for me. I'm a 22-year resident of Newton, and my husband Robert and I have a son at Newton North. I'm the daughter and sister of teachers and hold an MBA from Northeastern University. My focus personally and professionally is on education. In Newton, I've served on school councils at Horace Mann, Day, Middle School, and North, and on the Social Studies Curriculum Committee, the Full-Day Kindergarten Task Force, the Day Principal Search Committee, and Newton's Strategic Planning Effort. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters Education Committee and the Board of Directors of the Newton Conservators. Our students face a rapidly changing and highly competitive world. That's why our goals for Newton must be to pursue ambitious standards that are the hallmark of a world-class education. These include investing in early learning with proven practices like full-day kindergarten, removing barriers to participation like fees on the arts, and improving our support for out-of-school time activities, accelerating our investments in STEM by stronger support at all grade levels, both in and out of school, providing the right instructional tools for our teachers and students by addressing the chronic underfunding of our digital resources.
Time.
And funding education improvements with recurring surplus and
Sorry,
smart
time.
budget trade-offs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
Andrea.
I'm Andrea Steenstrup. Nice to meet you. I attended public schools in New York, where my father was an elementary school principal. My mother was a junior high math teacher. I hold a bachelor's in math and an MBA from RPI. I worked in public accounting and then Cigna Healthcare in Illinois, where I managed large budgets and was responsible for identifying cost savings. I moved to Newton in 2007, primarily for the public schools. Since moving here, I've been extremely active in all of my children's schools, both on PTOs and school councils, mostly in financial roles. I worked on the override committee. My 4 children are currently enrolled at all levels of Newton Public Schools, so I have a finger on the pulse of what is going on. I understand that each child is completely different. Before living in Newton, I was active in my children's schools in Seattle and London, so I also have been exposed to very different school systems. My priorities for school committee are simple: make sure every dollar is well spent, help every child reach their full potential, provide appropriate technology at all school levels, and modernizing our school buildings while maintaining neighborhood schools that are safe and secure, both in terms of buildings and staffing. I'm an independent thinker and an active listener. I have a track record of working well with others to come up with creative solutions. I realize that our schools do not have an unlimited budget, so a big part of the school committee's job is making trade-offs and defining to and sticking to priorities. I think we have excellent schools here and would love the opportunity to help keep them that way.
Time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's go right to the question about whether you favor building a 16th elementary school for Newton in Upper Falls that will deal with the severe overcrowding as well as the impact on Upper Falls of not having a neighborhood school.
Well, after reading today's tab and learning that there are 362 units planned for the Wells Avenue Office Park, which is in this area, I think it's time to go back and look at what our planning is. We're adding over 200 units at Riverside, 362 units at Wells Avenue, 80 units at Austin Street, 36 units at Court Street, and I'm told another 20 units at Crescent Street. Add that all up, it's almost 800 units of housing. I think we need to take a look at things again and decide what we need to do in order to accommodate those students.
Is that a yes or a no on a new elementary school for Upper Falls?
That is a let's go back to the drawing board because the plan we have now needs to be revised.
Andrea?
Okay, so I'd like to say that I am a huge fan of neighborhood schools and walking to school. That's one of the reasons we bought our house where we did, was because we wanted a neighborhood school, and Newton values neighborhood schools. If our enrollment keeps going up at the rate it's going, we may need a 16th elementary school. I think the way the current numbers are, you know, I don't think it's currently the plan, but I'm certainly open to, you know, as the enrollment grows, to keep looking at it. But some things that I think can help in the meantime is with the seats that we're adding in elementary schools now, there will be some redistricting. So I think at the very least, we can keep the neighborhood together and at least keep them at one school. And then another thing that we can look at is the busing fees. Of all the fees, the bus fee is my least favorite, and certainly the elementary school bus fee. It doesn't bring in that much money, and I agree that it's not fair that you should be charged to go out of your neighborhood for school.
What is your position on the busing fees?
Well, if you can't walk to school and you're, as this neighborhood is, I think that the school committee should go back and look at that and say, is it really fair to charge a bus fee for students who have no neighborhood school and no other alternative? And I don't think that the fees that bring in that much money. I think there are several of our fees that don't bring in that much money and need to be reviewed and revised.
So Andrea, you mentioned redistricting, and clearly there's a redistricting coming up. To what extent are there factors beyond numbers that you'll weigh in determining what schools children will be attending? In other words, you know, what are the different constituencies that should be considered in the decision-making process?
So I think, well, first of all, we don't want to disrupt kids that are already in a school. We want to keep families together, so it's got to be a long process that moves towards a goal and doesn't just, you know, disrupt as much as possible. I think we want to keep, you know, cohorts together as much as we can, like neighborhoods together. We have to look at their complete path through the schools, you know, like which high school they're going to end up, because I know we're trying to balance north and south. And, you know, right now we have too many kids going north. And then, of course, we have to look at the middle school. And I think walking to school as much as possible should be number one. And then also walking to school safely. So I guess distance, and then, you know, road hazards and things like that.
Margaret?
Well, I lived here during the last redistricting, and I know it was a very emotional thing, and people don't like to change. And it's not going to be easy to get people to go through a plan of redistricting. I remember the pain and the angst last time. So I think it's really important to listen to what people have to say about their neighborhood and about their neighborhood schools. But I also think it's important not to overload our middle schools. Right now we have day middle school at 1,000 and climbing, while other middle schools are much smaller. We have more students going to North. We have development taking place in all kinds of different places, and all of those things need to come into play as we talk about redistricting. And we have to remember that for many people this is a very emotional issue, and we have to listen and be compassionate.
We're the only village that has been split to 3 different schools, and our kids from this area would not go to Day and Newton North. We are slated to go to South and Oak Hill and South.
I understand that.
A school here where we can keep our kids here and not overcrowd the other schools that then bump those kids to other schools. We need a school here that keeps our kids here.
And this just goes to exactly what I was saying. It's a very passionate and very personal issue.
I have a couple of questions for you on fiscal issues, and I have one for you and one for you. So let me just, without any further ado, Margaret, you have been portrayed as a dreamer of big things, often big ticket items. Are there specific things that you would love to have, but you know that the city cannot afford?
Oh, I'd love to have all new schools, and I know the city can't afford that. But certainly, you know,
I mean, you gave a list of a number of things that you favor.
I don't think that there's anything on my list that cannot be achieved over time. It's a matter of priorities, and it's a matter of setting priorities. I don't think that we should be saying, oh, we can't afford that, and therefore we can't do that. We have to say, you know what? We might need to do that, and what are the ways we can get there? I've worked in nonprofits for over 25 years, and no one has ever come to me and said, Margaret, here's $1 million, go out and start that program. Instead, we've sat down and said, you know what? We really need to do these things. How do we make our budget stretch? How do we design the program to make it happen? So I might be a big dreamer, but I'm also a big realist.
Andrea, you have been portrayed as a bean counter. Are there some items that are imperative, irrespective of cost?
I think technology needs to be funded by the school system, because I don't think it's fair now that the PTOs, it's on the PTOs, and the rich schools can afford it and the poor schools can't. And I also think our schools, especially the ones that are going to be rebuilt, need to be made more conducive to learning. I think that's another must.
How do you balance the virtually unlimited needs and wants of the schools against the pocketbook concerns of older people living on fixed income? Or is that not the role of the school committee to think about?
I think it's certainly the role of the school committee to think about, because if we're asking for money, we have to be aware of how much money is available, what the other needs of the city are, you know, like the roads, and it's not, I mean, the schools are very important, but there's a lot more to the city than just the schools.
Margaret?
Well, there are lots of ways to manage the budget and make things work. In my professional life, I work in a lot of school districts that are very, very poorly funded, at the state average or below the state average. But when something is important for the education of students, they rearrange their budgets to make it happen. So I think we need to be more open to prioritizing and to making the trade-offs that are necessary to get things done that are really important, like full-day kindergarten.
Would either of you seek revenue by selling naming rights to schools?
Well, you know, professionally I raise money, and I can tell you that raising money for public schools is not an easy thing to do. I've been doing it in 10 school districts, and it is very, very difficult. There's a real perception among corporations and private foundations that the public should be funding public schools, and they're not very willing to put money forward for anything, even for school improvement. I also read recently in the Boston Globe that the Bank America Pavilion is no longer going to be the Bank America Pavilion, that they're pulling out of it. They had a 15-year naming rights for which they paid $5 million. So I don't see naming rights as something that's going to bring in a lot of money. I can see the possibility if you're building something new to ask to name it after somebody who may be interested in funding it, but I can't see going around and, you know, calling it the, you know,
the Marjorie Arons-Barron.
Yeah, Marjorie Arons-Barron cafeteria.
Andrea?
So I would say that in Newton, our major tax source is the residents. You know, it's a 90% real estate tax revenue is a good, you know, that's the biggest portion of our revenue. And if we don't want to keep raising taxes, I think we need to look elsewhere. And I'm open to anything if it's done well and if it's done right. I don't want to have a McDonald's cafeteria, but if, you know, Joey from Friends wants to, you know, put his name on the auditorium at North, why not?
Now,
I think
before,
we have to be creative and open to everything if we don't want to keep having overrides.
before you both talked about the bus fees for Upper Falls, is there a case to be made for eliminating all school fees? I mean, when I was in the Newton school system, we didn't pay separately for any activities.
So I don't think so. I mean, yeah, of course there's a case for it, but the case for not doing it is that it brings in $2 million now. And it's unfortunate that we have to rely on fees, but it's part of our budget. There's a waiver system so that if someone can't afford the fee, they can apply for a waiver. And I know Margaret's going to say that, that people are uncomfortable with that, but I know Newton Public Schools are working to make that a friendlier process. Sometimes, like with the music fee, the principal at an elementary school will identify a family and approach them so they don't have to approach the music teacher for the waiver. I know that the school committee looks at the fees every year. They're very, they take a careful look at participation, and if the fee is hindering participation, they adjust it. They adjusted the instrumental music fee last year. They lowered it by $50. They lowered the super cap so that a family used to be $1,800 was the most they would pay. Now it's $1,200. They completely eliminated the high school activity fee because it was, there was a lot of uproar about it from students and, teachers, and it was hindering participation, so just took it away. And, I think as long as that keeps happening, I think it's okay.
Margaret?
But then where's the $2 million going to come from?
Margaret?
I feel very passionate.
Please let the candidates speak.
I feel very passionate about this one, particularly the elementary instrumental music fee. For 45 years, my mother taught elementary instrumental music in 3 different states, in school districts that were far less affluent than Newton. And most of her students would never have taken those lessons if there had been a fee. Now, I know there's waivers, but I also know from talking to voters that people do not even allow their children to start down that path because it's $150 for the lesson plus $150 to rent the instrument. I think that it is also a slippery slope. We are paying fees for instruction that is done by a teacher who is on salary during the school day. And other districts in the Midwest have gone from this to charging for AP classes, to charging extra for chemistry, to charging extra for all kinds of things. It's just a way of cost shifting expenses of the district onto families. And I think we need to be very careful about when and where we do that and how we do that.
Thank you. Over the last 9 years, a distinct gap between the MCAS reading achievement of low-income students and that of their not low-income peers has remained fairly steady. What role should the school committee play in addressing persistent gaps in MCAS achievement, and what specific steps should be taken?
Well,
Andrea?
I know it's in the strategic plan, the school department's strategic plan. That's like their number one priority is closing that achievement gap. And they have, targeted interventions for students that are struggling in reading. Schools that have done, have decreased their scores on the MCAS have gotten extra support, like Memorial Spalding a few years ago. And I think we just need to keep a close eye on it.
Margaret?
Well, I see this as a problem that's been going on for over a decade. The scores have been flat both for low-income and non-low-income students when it comes to 3rd grade reading. But in fact, our low-income students are 40 percentage points behind our non-low-income students, and that's a lot. The state set a goal for us to reduce those achievement gaps by 50% by 2017. I think one of the best things we could do to begin to make a dent in that 3rd grade reading gap is to institute full-day kindergarten, to have our children there all the time, 4 days a week until 3:30 or until 3 o'clock. I think it's very important. We know that for every $1 we invest in early education, we save $7 down the line. So not only will it help close that gap, but it's going to save money in the long run. But it's very concerning because in that 10 years that gap has not closed, our school system has gone from 5% of students being low income to 11% of students being low income. So the gap is affecting more and more children each year.
Andrea, what's your position on all-day kindergarten?
So I'm open to discussing anything. I don't have like, you know, I want to be on school committee to listen to people and to make informed decisions based on, you know, what the school department thinks and what parents think. But I do think that we have a very effective program now. It's a hybrid model where half the class stays 2 afternoons a week. And the beauty of that is that they're only there with half the class. So they have 5 hours of, you know, small group instruction with a fully certified teacher, and it works. And I think if we went to full-day kindergarten, in order to preserve that, it would cost, you know, Dr. Fleischman has stated that it would cost over $1 million to maintain the quality. And to show that, to illustrate that, Wellesley is currently considering full-day kindergarten, and they're looking to do an override to pay for it.
Did you have something to add?
I do want to make a comment because, you know, in my professional life, I see a lot of different school districts, and I have been in school districts where there are 2 hours of small group instruction every day without sending children home. So there are other ways to do it, and I think we need to open our minds to perhaps doing things differently in order to give our children the best opportunities.
What is the role of the school committee in influencing curriculum? A couple of examples. I mean, clearly one would favor, for example, moves in the schools to expand STEM offerings. But I noticed in today's tab that there is an ad under the headline of "What are Newton students really learning?" and it raises questions about whether Israelis and Muslims are being fairly represented in the teachings. And I was kind of taken aback by this, but what role does the school committee have in getting involved in curriculum offerings?
Well, the state is pretty clear on what it puts out in terms of curriculum frameworks for all of our grades. And I think the role of the school committee is to make sure that the curriculum that we are using in Newton Public Schools is aligned with that curriculum framework. In the next 2 years, we're going to be moving to a new framework called the Common Core Standards. So I think that a great part of what the school committee does is ensure that the curriculum is aligned with those standards and is appropriate.
Well, no more, please. Andrea?
No, I would say that the school committee is responsible for setting broad policy. The intricacies of the curriculum isn't really their role. They hire the superintendent based, you know, and it's really his job to choose the curriculum.
Okay, are there best practices that you've seen implemented elsewhere that Newton is not using but should be using?
Full-day kindergarten.
Andrea? Andrea?
Something I would like to see is world languages in elementary school, but again, that would be my dream to have in elementary, you know, to add something.
And that's certainly something that Wellesley is considering along with full-day kindergarten, and that's part of what they're talking about doing an override for. It's a package of many things, not just full-day kindergarten.
I see. Okay, questions from the audience? Sally?
How would you feel if a group of people came to the school committee and suggested that they wanted to start a charter school?
Well, Newton's not eligible for a charter school unless there's a regional charter. It would not be possible because we're not one of the target districts if you go through and look at the rules. So the only thing is possible is a regional charter. And the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education only issues one regional charter per year in the entire state. So this year there actually was a charter school proposed as a regional charter for Brookline, Newton, Weston, Watertown, Waltham, but the proposal never got past the commissioner's desk. So it's not something as a regional charter school that we would, as a school committee, ever have any control over.
Andrea?
That being said, if there was a charter school that was able to serve some of our students that had a special need, like that was at the Chinese school, I thought it would be nice for, to have a niche served, if we couldn't serve it.
And actually, some of our children in Newton do attend charter school. They attend the math science charter school in Marlborough. They can go ahead and apply if there are seats still available. So I know that there are a number of children that do attend that charter school.
Other questions? Mark? Well, I'm sorry, you had a chance before. Maxine.
As part of the override was to do a feasibility study on the Zervis School. The Zervis School is 3/4 of a mile from Angier, which is being greatly enlarged. It's very close to Mason Rice, and it's across Route 9 from Upper Falls. So it really doesn't help Upper Falls in the way a neighborhood school would help. A lot of people around here feel that the school committee has decided that Zervis is going to be probably completely rebuilt. They're taking money from the override year after year to put toward rebuilding Zervis, so it's not going to be through the state, it's going to be locally done.
Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. People here feel that Zervis should just be renovated as needed, and that the money, the $40 million that the city was planning to spend to rebuild it, should be used to build a school in Upper Falls. And
Question?
my question is, if you get to the school committee, which seems pretty intransigent about this, how would you, if you felt that a school was needed in Upper Falls rather than rebuilding Zervis, would you have the guts to go against the whole school committee?
So first of all, the first step of the Zervis project is the feasibility study that the Board of Aldermen approved to do. And part of that study is to determine if Zervis is in the right spot. And I know that's different than, than...
Everybody that we've spoken to on the school committee seems to feel pretty
No, so if I believed that it should be here, I would certainly fight for it. I wouldn't do what everybody else does. That's not my style.
Margaret?
Well, in light of, the expanding development on this side of the city, I think it's time to just stop and take a deep breath and to say, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Because frankly, I don't think rebuilding Zervis and adding 100 seats is going to solve the problem. And if it's not going to solve the problem, then why are we spending $40 million? So, and I think $40 million is a lot. Recently I saw that there was a 400-student school built on the Cape for less than $10 million. So we have to ask ourselves, are we spending it wisely, and are we putting the resources where they need to be, and are we getting enough capacity? I'm not sure we are. And I think it's time to say, well, let's look at other options. And let's listen to the people from Upper Falls, let's listen to people from other neighborhoods and hear what they have to say and figure out, is there another way to do this?
We had a question over here.
Yes. Both of you have made references to other districts, things that other people are doing. How would each of you, if elected, work to ensure that the school committee and the school department is open to new ideas outside our own city and our own state?
Well, I'm certainly open to new ideas. So I would be one of 8, or one of 9. So I would bring that, and I'm a consensus builder and collaborate with people.
One of the things that I would really like to see is for our school committee and our superintendent to be more involved with the statewide associations. I would like to see someone more involved with the Mass Association of School Committees, that's MASC, and the Mass Association of School Superintendents. I also know there is a very active and very helpful urban superintendents group that's chaired by Julie Hackett, who is the superintendent in Taunton. And I've met with her, and I've met with people in that group, and I think it would be a wonderful thing for Dr. Fleischman to participate in that group. I also think it would be great for members of our school committee to meet with some of the members of the surrounding school committees. I myself have met with the chairman of the Brookline School Committee, and I learned a lot from sitting and talking to him for an hour. I think that we should do that more frequently. I was in a meeting with the head of the Mass Association of School Superintendents a couple of weeks ago, and he says the one thing that he always tells everybody in his district and his association is stop being so parochial, get out of the district, go someplace else, see what's going on. You might learn something.
Would that apply to getting more involved with the Metro STEM network?
Absolutely.
Andrea?
Yeah,
Oh.
sure. I answered before, but yeah, that would be a thing to do.
Any other questions? Yes, last question.
Okay. So I've been a speaker at school committee meetings for over 10 years, and the feedback and the feeling is that it's always a one-way communication. And so we go and we talk and we give examples, and the school committee just sits and never gives any feedback. Only one time a year that you can get any kind of interaction, and that's at the budget review process. So I wanted to ask both of you to address what your thoughts are on communication between the community, not just the parent community, but the community of students, so residents, elderly, middle-aged parents, and the school committee, and what would you think? What would you do to make it less of a one-way
Margaret?
Well, one of the things that I've seen in some other districts is an annual report that goes out from the district, and it's mailed to every household. So it not only tells what goes on in the district, but it gives achievement data for each and every one of the schools, information about what's going on with programs, who the principal is, all that kind of thing, so that people feel more connected. And I agree with you, Joe Louise. I've been on that side of one-way communication too, and it's a little daunting. And I think we have to find a way to be a little bit more interactive. I'm not sure what that is, but I sure would love to discuss it at the Mass Association of School Committees and see what other people have done to find out if there's something that would be helpful and productive, and bring it to our school committee, because it is, people don't come there lightly. It's not a fun thing to do. And to make people feel like they're on the hot seat and that they're not being listened to, even if it's not true, the perception makes it very difficult for someone to come back. So
Andrea?
we need to warm it up.
No, I agree completely, that it should be a two-way conversation, and, there should be some feedback to the people who come and speak, that their ideas were considered, and, that they were heard.
Okay, we have time for closing statements. I'm trying to remember who went. I think you went first, so Andrea.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here tonight. I'm running for school committee, obviously. I have 4 children currently in the Newton schools. I've been very involved. I have 13 years of activist experience in school systems, and I have 10 more years to go in Newton, so I have a lot invested. I'm a straight shooter, an independent thinker, yet I'm open-minded and collaborative, and I have very good judgment. I think these are very important skills to work on a committee, any committee. I have a strong financial background. I understand trade-offs. I know that you can't add spending without increasing revenue or taking something else away, which has usually been class size, and I really want to protect our class sizes and maintenance. I think we have to keep our, we can't let maintenance slip anymore, because that's how we got where we are. I have a positive attitude. I think Newton schools are very strong. I want to keep them strong and make them better. I'm asking for your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Marjorie. It's been great. And thank you, Anil, and for inviting us. Our school committee governs the education of our children. That means managing budgets and overseeing the superintendent. But it also means creating the vision for our schools. And the vision is not about where we are, but where we want to be. It's about where we're going and what kind of school system we're trying to create now and in the future. I'm running to join that effort, to add my broad background and experience in K-12 education to the team. I ask for your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our time is up. Don't forget that.
Thank you.
Don't forget that when Ward 5 goes to the polls, you'll also be choosing members of your area council. It's a separate ballot, and you have to ask for it. For Waban, area council voting will be at the Zervis School only, even if you vote for mayor, school committee, and alderman at other locations. Now, we're mentioning Waban only because this is a new experience for Waban, and the Upper Falls Area Council and the Newton Highlands Area Council have done this before. I'd like to thank the audience for participating. I'd like to thank the candidates all for participating, not just in this event, but in the whole realm of electoral activities and public service. And finally, to you, the audience, thank you for your enthusiastic level of participation.